Hopefully everything will go a little bit more smoothly this time. So sorry about that, everyone. Welcome back. We were just saying, if anyone wants to get Haggadah in front of them now would be a good time, but I'm going to share the screen as we go through. So don't worry, if you don't have it in front of you, you will be able to see it on the screen as well. So no worries there. What we're going to do today is we are going to bit of a bad noise there. We're going to go through the Haggadah, and really what we're going to try and do is delve in more detail. And the best way to do that is to question things that seemingly on the surface don't seem to make sense, don't seem to fit together. But hopefully when we delve deeper, when we question, when we look in more detail, everything will fit together in a nicer, better way. I always think it's worthwhile, especially with stories that we see over and over again every single year. I'm just going to mute everyone. Let's do that. Okay. Especially with stories that we read and we revisit every year, sometimes because it can become commonplace and we can fall into the pitfall of not appreciating the true depth of everything. So it's always worth trying to look at it and approach it with new eyes. And as we know with the seder night, with the Haggadah, it's all about questioning anyway. And hopefully we're going to see that in even more detail as we go through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen for you. And we're going to be looking through on the website Sefaria. Hopefully everyone should now be able to see that in front of them, and that should work nicely. Hopefully everyone can see that in front of them. Some technical difficulties. Okay, excellent. So everyone should now see in front of them the Haggadah. This is on Sefaria, which is a very great website, great resources, highly recommended to use it. And what we're going to try and do, due to time constraints, we're not going to be able to go through the whole Haggadah. I'll tell you now, the aim of this evening's event is we're going to try and go through half the Haggadah, the first half of the Haggadah. And hopefully what that will do is it will give us a basis and set us up with a greater and more detailed understanding of the Haggadah and of Seder night itself. And through that, we should be able to then go on as we go through on Seder night. The rest of the Haggadah, we should be able to continue on with fresh eyes and a fresh approach. So we will start with Kaddish, which is how we start. And Kaddish, as we know, is effectively, all it is we make Kiddush. Therefore, the obvious question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is the stage not called, why is the stage not called, this stage of the Seder, not called Kiddush, but rather called Kaddish? And Rav Kook brings a very interesting answer to this. He says that we call it Kaddish in reference to Kaddish, which in Hebrew is causative, which means to sanctify. And it's there to remind us of our role, that we have an incredible ability, that we're imbued with incredible holiness and ability to sanctify time and make it holy. And that's why we call it Kaddish. And this ability really stems back to temple times, where what we would do when it came to Rosh Chodesh, the entire process was brought about by us. So someone would physically see the new moon. They would then go and give their testimony over to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, if they accepted their testimony, would declare a new month. And that is how we would fix our calendar. That is how we would fix the new month. And in turn, then all of the festivals would be fixed in that way as well. And that all stemmed from our process. That all stemmed from ourselves, from our ability to be Mekadesh, to sanctify. And actually, if we scroll down here and we look at the end of the bracha that we make on Kiddush, it's the same bracha we say in the Amidah, and the same bracha we make every single one of the Shalosh Regalim, the three festivals. We say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Blessed are you, Hashem, who sanctifies Israel and their times and their seasons. And what's interesting is that's very different from Shabbat. On Shabbat, we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, Hashem, who sanctifies the Shabbat. And here we see this difference. There's sort of Israel stuck in the middle, who sanctifies Israel and their timings. And there's a Gemara brought in Brachot, which gives an interesting reason for this. It says that really it's a two-part process that occurs. Hashem is Mekadesh. Hashem sanctifies us, the Jewish people, and by doing that, he gives us the ability to sanctify time. And that is how the process works. Therefore, we have that holiness, we have that ability, and that's how in the olden days, now obviously we have the calendar set and fixed, but in the olden days, we would fix Rosh Chodesh, and from that, all of the festivals. And it's an incredible power and an incredible responsibility that we have to this ability to sanctify time. That when it comes to Shabbat, it's almost a natural thing that Shabbat occurs. It's occurred from the dawn of time, from the beginning of creation. Every single Friday night and Saturday is Shabbat, come what may. When it comes to the festivals, it's our proactivity, it's our actions that enable the festivals to take place. And really what we do when we sit down on Seder night, when we sit down on Pesach, is we take what would be a normal Sunday and a normal Monday, and we imbue them with holiness, and we make them holy. We are proactive in that occurrence, in that operation that occurs to make a normal day, as it were, to make that holy and to make that special. And that's an incredible power that we have, this ability to take time and to give it an extra level, to give it that new status of holiness. And so we see the reason we call Kiddush, the stage where we make Kiddush, the reason we call it Kaddish, is perhaps a reference to that ability to be Mekadesh, and it teaches us of this importance of how we use our time. Time is so important to us, and we need to ensure that we use it in the correct way. The next stage that we move on to there is Urchatz and Karpas. Of course, Urchatz, we wash our hands. Not every single person needs to wash their hands, only a minimum of one. The leader of the seder, whoever's going to give out the Karpas, they should wash their hands. There's a very nice minhag that we have on Seder night that no one should wash their own hands or fill their own cups. Other people should do it for you. And that really ties into the idea of haseba, the leaning that we do. We also lean on Seder night. All of these ideas are tied into the concept of freedom, that we're free. We're treated almost like royalty on this day. So there's a nice idea that we wash each other's hands, that you don't wash your own hands, but someone rather does it for you. Same with pouring the cup. And the reason that we wash our hands for Urchatz is because it used to be that we were careful whenever we would eat wet food or food dipped in liquid, as we're about to do with Karpas. We would, sorry, just admitting people in from the waiting room. Whenever we are careful, we used to eat foods dipped in liquid. We would be careful to wash our hands. That's not the case anymore. We know now we only wash our hands before bread, but on Seder night we take extra special care, so we wash our hands before we eat the karpas, which is obviously going to be dipped in the liquid. And we go to karpas, which is a lowly vegetable, that grows low. It's quite nondescript exactly what karpas is. People use a whole different array of things. It tends to be, in my experience, I've usually used a potato or parsley, but the common denominator is it has to be this lowly vegetable, and we dip it in the salt water. And the question obviously is then, why does it have to be a vegetable that grows specifically in low places? And the answer that our commentators give us is because it's a sign of our humility. It's a sign of us showing that we understand that we're not perfect, and in some ways it's a throwback. It's us reminiscing over the slavery, and that really introduces us to one of the key components of Seder night, which is the duality that exists within it. It's a simultaneously on Seder night. We just said, we pour, other people pour our drinks, and we lean in the way of royalty. We celebrate that freedom, but at the same time, simultaneously, we also have that reminiscence of slavery, and we have all the bitterness and hardships that goes with it. And it seems to be that both are going on at the same time, and they seem obviously contrasting. And hopefully as we go through a little bit more of the Haggadah, we'll gain a greater understanding and a greater appreciation for exactly how these two can fit together, exactly how they work together. And a lovely idea by Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, is that the two dippings that we do on Seder night are the exact inverse of each other. The first dipping that we do, we take something that should be sweet, so the karpas should be ideally sweet, although potato and parsley, I'm not sure it fits into that, but that's the idea. And we dip it into something bitter, i.e. the salt water. The second dipping that we do is the complete opposite. We take something bitter, the maror, and we dip it in the roset, which is of course very sweet. And the idea he brings is that these sweet things represent freedom. And he says that freedom in of itself is of course very sweet, but it becomes embittered if we use our freedom in any way to oppress other people or to neglect others or to ignore our duty of care to other people. It becomes embittered. And likewise, there can be times in life when we go through hard experiences, when we go through difficulty, and it can seem that things are really bad and oppressive. But if those experiences allow us to grow, allow us to become better people, allow us to grow closer and care more for the people around us, then there's a sweetness that comes out of that bitterness. I think that's a very powerful idea. We next move on to Yachatz, where, of course, we break the middle matzah. And there are three real reasons why we break the middle matzah. Rabbi Sachs brings these three reasons. The first reason is that the matzah, as we're about to read at the start of Maggid, is halach ma'anya. It's the bread of affliction. It's the poor man's bread. And just as, God forbid that no one should ever know what it's like, but if anyone is in a situation where they literally don't know where their next meal is coming from, the tendency is to save food for later on. And it's the same idea here that this is like poor man's bread. We take on that mindset. So we break a bit of the food away to save it for later. The second reason that's given is, of course, for the afikomen. We know in the times of the temple, the very last thing that we could eat, the very last thing that we were allowed to taste on Seder night itself, was the afikomen, which was the Korban Pesach. Now we don't, of course, have the Korban Pesach, but we have the matzah, which is a remez, which is sort of a placeholder, a symbolic reminder of that Korban Pesach, which we now have with the afikomen, and that should be the last thing we eat. So we sort of break it in half, and later on we will eat it as the very, very last thing right at the end. The third reason that Rabbi Sachs brings, apologies there. The third reason that Rabbi Sachs brings is that the matzah, much like we just mentioned with the seder as a whole, there is duality within the matzah. There are two conflicting ideas within the matzah as well. On the one hand, as we're about to read, you can see down here, right, we call it halach ma'anya, we call it the bread of affliction. On the other hand, we know it's the bread of freedom. We know it's the thing that we ate when we came out of Mitzrayim, and on the night we celebrate our freedom, it becomes the symbol of freedom. So that how can these two ideas sort of combine within one entity, within one food? And so when we split the matzah, Rabbi Sachs says it's like a symbolic representation of the two ideas, these two seemingly conflicting ideas that hopefully as we go on, we can start to understand a bit deeper and start to resolve. But we split the matzah to show that, yes, it's halach ma'ani, it's the bread of affliction. It's also going to be the bread of freedom, as we will see later on. We then start with Maggid, which I think really is the main course of the Seder meal, of the Seder experience. Of course, during Shulchan Aruch, there will hopefully be another main course as well. But this is really the key part of our Seder. And like I say, we're hopefully going to be able to go through the first part of Maggid to gain a greater understanding of what that is all about. So we start with halach ma'anya. I'm just going to read it for speed's sake. We'll read it quickly in English, and then really, like I said, what we're going to try and do is break down a few questions that arise over it, and hopefully from that gain a greater understanding. So we say, this is the bread of, it says here, destitution. I prefer the word affliction. There we go. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is famished should come and eat. Anyone who's in need should come and partake of the Korban Pesach. Now we're here, next year in Israel, this year slaves, next year we will be free people. It's a fascinating way we choose to start Maggid. Like I say, the main part of the Seder, it's a really interesting way that this is how we choose to begin it. And there are a number of questions that arise immediately. The first question is, we've just said this is the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. But that seems quite out of our place with our understanding of what matzah actually was. Our understanding is that the Jewish people, in their haste to leave, when they were being freed, they cooked this unleavened bread, and it didn't have time to rise because such was their haste to leave, such was their eagerness, such was the way that Hashem had planned the timescale. There was no time for their bread to rise, and that's why they ate it. But here we're seeming to say that it was something they ate in Egypt, and that seems to not quite fit with our understanding. So the commentators look at this, and they actually say something really fascinating, and they bring an amazing, wild story of the Ibn Ezra about how he was taken prisoner, and he was fed matzah when he was taken prisoner. It's a very interesting story. But what he says is that the matzah is what is often fed to prisoners or slaves because it's very cheap. It expands in the stomach. It's very filling. You don't need a lot of it to give someone their nutrients, and therefore it's often the sort of economical, viable version of what is fed. And so actually, this is what the Jewish people, this was their mainstay of their diet in Egypt. They were fed matzah, and that was what they used to eat in the land of Egypt, not just when they left, but in the land of Egypt. Now, this obviously brings a question, which is, it seemed to be a big deal when they left Egypt about the unleavened bread. And here it seems to be, it's just the mainstay of their diet. It was just the thing that they ate the rest of the time anyway. And now they were just eating it on their way out, but it's what they ate the whole time. So I think this really leads us to an answer about matzah. We spoke about this kind of conflicting ideas about matzah. And I think this idea here, that it was both what they ate in Egypt and what they ate on the way out of Egypt, really links everything together. And Rabbi Sachs brings an amazing answer. And he says that Seder night is supposed to be an experience, and we're going to speak about this as we continue. It's supposed to not just be a retelling of old stories, but it's supposed to be something we physically feel, something we experience. We're not supposed to end Seder night as almost the same people as we began it. There's supposed to be some sort of transformation that takes place, some sort of process that occurs. And Rabbi Sachs says regarding the matzah, therefore, that this transformation, this process that is from slavery to freedom, from oppression to joy, that is not dependent upon the kind of foods or whatever that we're eating, but rather it's the mindset with which we eat it. It's the same matzah, it's the same food, that we literally take the same piece and we split it in half. But at the beginning of the Seder, when we are like slaves, because we haven't gone through that process, it tastes a certain way. Once we've gone through that process, our mindset is such that it tastes completely different, and it becomes the bread of freedom rather than the bread of affliction. And it's the mindset that really matters after all. That's a very important point in understanding the Seder as a whole, but also understanding our relationship to the matzah. The next question that comes up is we say anyone who's hungry should come and eat, and that seems to be a very bizarre invitation. You've said this is the bread of affliction. Anyone who's hungry, come and eat it. That seems to be a very strange way to extend an invitation. It seems to not make any sense at all that we would slip it in here. And again, Rabbi Sachs brings another incredible viewpoint on this, and he says that it's by sharing our food, by sharing our matzah, that we begin the process, the transformative process to change from slavery to freedom. It all stems from sharing our experiences, sharing our food, sharing our tables, maybe not literally right now at the moment, please God, in the future, but sharing our lives with others, sharing what we have. That is how you initiate the process of changing from slavery to freedom. And therefore, it does make sense, because it was the bread of affliction. But once I invite everyone in to eat it with me, it very much becomes the bread of freedom. It very much initiates that transformation there. We then move on to the last bit. We say, now we're here next year in the land of Israel. This year we're slaves, next year we're free people. A lot of commentators comment on the change of language, that we bring the changes to Aramaic. There's a number of reasons for this, some of which are very simple, so that everyone can understand what's going on, some of which are quite wild and entail stories of demons and jealous angels and all sorts. We're probably not going to have time to delve into that too much, but it's interesting to note. And the obvious question is, of course, we're not slaves. Thank God, we're free people. We aren't slaves as things stand. So what does it mean this year we're slaves, next year we're free people? And Abu Draham brings a really amazing insight into this verse. And he says, we say this line for the benefit of the poor person who we've just invited in. We don't want to single him out or in any way make him feel uncomfortable. We want them to feel like they belong. And so we say, this year things aren't so good, next year things will be better. And we say that in the collective. And I think this year, after the year we've all had, it's very easy for us to identify that with this year, things aren't so amazing. Next year, please God, things will be better. We'll be free people. And next year in Israel, please God, of course. But I think delving in a little bit deeper to what the Abu Draham is really getting at, what he's saying is we as a people are only as free as the least free amongst us. And although, thank God, we live in an incredible society where we're free and we're able to practice and we live, thank God, good lives, we know that's not the case for everyone around the world, both within the Jewish community and without the Jewish community. And whilst there is still people suffering, whilst there are still people who are not free, we are not truly free free ourselves. And so we can collectively make this statement for all of us, and we tell that for the future should be brighter and better for everyone as well. We next move on to Manish Tanah. The sages ask the question on this. They say, who is speaking here? And that's an interesting question, because I wouldn't have thought to ask it. Of course, whoever reads the Manish Tanah is the one speaking. But there's a bunch of different answers brought by this. Abu Draham says the wise son is asking all of these questions. Later, we're going to meet the four sons, and the wise son is the one who's asking all of these questions. The interesting point of that is, of course, even though he is wise, he's still asking questions, and that really is the core of seder. That's really the core of the Haggadah. No matter how wise we get, no matter how much we think we know, the only way to improve and to learn is to continue to ask questions. The Aruchat Chaim brings a very interesting point on Manish Tanah, and he says that everyone should read it in a language that they understand. And I know a lot of kids work really hard to learn Manish Tanah in Hebrew, and some schools teach it that you switch from Hebrew to English, which is great. But what I would say is, if someone has really hard to learn the Hebrew, that's amazing, but read it in English as well. Make sure that all the questions are fully understood, and that's a key point of Seder night. Like we say, not just about the questions, but understanding what's going on. So that's very important as well. The Mincha Asher comes and asks, why is it specifically these four questions? It seems quite random. There's lots of questions one can ask about Seder night. And we choose these four questions, which may not have been the four that originally came to mind. And he answers that in truth, it's all one question, that it's interlinked. And the one question is, on this night, do we celebrate freedom or commemorate slavery? And we've touched on this, that there's this conflict constantly going on. Which one is it? Do we celebrate, or do we commemorate and are embittered by the slavery? And the answer is, of course, as we've already said, Seder night itself is a process. It starts with slavery, and we go through that transformation, remembering that bitterness that can then allow us to appreciate the true sweetness of freedom. Only by starting in that low place can we appreciate the true magnitude of what occurred. We then move on to Avadim Hayinu. We look at Avadim Hayinu, or read very, very quickly in English. We were slaves to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out from there with a strong hand and outstretched arm. And if the Holy One, blessed be he, had not taken our ancestors from Egypt, behold, we and our children and our children's children would all be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. And even if we were all sages, all discerning, all elders, no matter how knowledgeable we get, it would still be a commandment upon us to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And anyone who adds to it is incredibly praiseworthy. And the question here, which I'm sure we ask, or we should ask ourselves every year, is that this just simply isn't true. We say, if Hashem hadn't taken us out, we would still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Well, for one thing, there is no Pharaoh in Egypt. So it can't literally be true at all. That can't be the case. So what are we really trying to get at? And I think in order to understand this, I want to look at this word here, meshubadim. It's translated down here as enslaved, which is how we often translate it. But I think that's an insufficient translating. I want to suggest something a little bit different, that it means subservient. But beyond being subservient, it means sort of intrinsically linked and embedded within an ideology. And what we're saying here is that we were subservient to the ideology of Pharaoh and Egypt. And that ideology was one of materialism, of physicality, of a lack of spirituality, of sexual immorality. Those were the things that encompassed the ideology of Egypt, and Pharaoh embodied that at that time. And we were subservient to that ideology. We became part of that. We know that the Jewish people, when they left, were on their lowest physical, their lowest possible spiritual level, their lowest possible spiritual plane. And had Hashem not saved us, had he not taken us out of Egypt, we would have remained with that ideology. But Hashem took us out, and he gave us that freedom, not just the freedom from the physical slavery, but the freedom from the spiritual neglect, the freedom for us to appreciate and realize that we have so much more that we can give in our lives, and we have so much more potential for holiness and goodness to bring into the world. And this, for me, is the key message of Seder night. There's a machloket in the Gemara between a dispute in the Gemara between Rav and Shmuel. And they argue, what are we celebrating on Seder night? It's clearly some sort of celebration, but what are we celebrating? Seems a strange question. And one argues that we're celebrating the transformation from slavery to freedom. And the other argues, actually, that's not it. It's the transformation from idolatry to worshipping Hashem. And in some ways, although they're two distinct answers, really they're the same thing. It's the same process. When we talk about remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's not just about that physical exodus that occurred, but much more than that. It's that spiritual exodus. It's that spiritual journey that we were able to be freed from the levels we were at and go to a new level. And we spoke about how Seder is supposed to be a journey. It's supposed to be a transformation. And that's very hard for a lot of us because, like I say, thank God we've never experienced what it's like to be a slave, and please God, we never should. So how can we really understand and really reenact and really re-experience that transformation if it's something that never occurred to us? And we can't, the answer is we can't necessarily do it that way. But what we can do and what we do and what we should do is we should go on this journey from this place where we all are in our lives, where we're not constantly thinking about spirituality. There are so many distractions, so many things in our way. Over Seder night, we go on this journey where we get to that new level, where we get to that realization of spirituality and appreciation of our potential in the world. And that is a journey, that is an experience that we can do. That is something that we can act upon, that we are able to experience. And hopefully as Seder night goes through, we should leave the worries and the stresses that are with us most of the time and really appreciate the things that are truly important in life. We move on next to the story of the five rabbis. Maisa, Berebi, Eliezer, and the five rabbis are sitting and discussing, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I'm like a man of 70. Of course, he wasn't actually 70 years old, but he's like a man of 70, and I've never understood why we should mention Yetziat Mitzrayim at night. The link to this is, firstly, we have some racists who still don't have all the answers about the Yetziat Mitzrayim. We just said that no matter how much knowledge we have, we should continue to talk about it. Well, this is a very clear example, representation. Even the greatest sages continue to learn. And it's explained by Ben Zoma. He says, when we say Yemei Chayecha, the days of your life, that would mean the days, but it says all the days of your life. And that extra word, kol, that all, means also the nights. These sages have a different understanding. They say all the days of your life would mean this world. All the days of your life means the time of Mashiach. So firstly, we have to ask the question, is it really true that if someone, a great scholar, dedicated their entire life to understanding and appreciating the Yetziat Mitzrayim and the story, and they read all the commentaries and learned the Gemara and the Mishnah and everything, that they couldn't get a full understanding? That seems a bit far-fetched. And the Gemara in Haggadah asks this question. That doesn't seem true. And the answer is that the Pesach story is reflected throughout time in every story of a struggle for freedom. Every single story of a struggle for freedom has elements and reflections of the Pesach story within it. And therefore, it's not just about learning everything, and we should continue always to delve and ask questions and learn and get a deeper understanding. But it's also about applying the wisdom and the lessons we learn from Yetziat Mitzrayim to today as well, to the problems of today, to the struggles for freedom in today. And that's why it's a never-ending process and something we can always improve upon. And if we look at this last line, we say, with our new understanding of what Yetziat Mitzrayim means as a spiritual journey, it makes sense that we should say it also in the days of Mashiach. But the wording used here is very interesting. Anyone who's familiar with Talmudic writings, whenever we are trying to say the word to include, we would normally say the word l'rabot. That's the usual word that one would say for the word to include. But here we say l'havi, which really means to bring. It's a sort of an interesting word. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzedek Livracha, comments on this, and he says, not only are we saying that we will discuss it in the times of Mashiach, but actually it's through this appreciation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, this deeper appreciation of this spiritual journey that we're on, through that will, and discussing that and learning and continuing to dig into that, that is what will bring about the days of Mashiach. That is what will bring that about. in of itself. And that's why we use the word lahavi, which means to bring. Not only will it be in the days of Mashiach, it will bring the days of Mashiach. And that's actually why some people, some Chabad Lubavitchers, have a Mashiach Suda during Pesach, because they believe it's a time that Mashiach could come. And please God, it will. So we move on, and this is really the last thing I want to discuss this evening, and it is Baruch HaMakom and the four sons. And here I think within these two are probably my two favorite ideas in the whole Haggadah. And so we start with Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Natan Torah, the Am Yisrael Baruch Hu. There are four blessings, and the Shem Shmuel comes along and says the four blessings prelude the four sons, because they correspond to the four sons. And what we're saying is that every single child is a bracha. Every single person is a bracha. Every single person has a spark of goodness, of greatness within them. And even here, this is incredible because we're about the Russia who seems to be very antagonistic to the whole idea of Seder night. Regardless, that the Russia is a bracha. Every single person, every single child is. And I feel that's a really wonderful message for us to take on Seder night. Seder night is all about bringing people together, and the best way to do that is with this attitude that everyone around us is a bracha, everyone is a blessing, and everyone can take, because everyone contains within that spark, that ability to be great. So we have, of course, the four sons, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. So if we look at the wise son, what does the wise son say? He says, what are these testimonies, the statutes and judgments that the Lord our God commanded you? And accordingly we say to him, as per the laws of the Pesach sacrifice, we may not eat an afikomen or anything after the Pesach sacrifice. We have to eat the Pesach sacrifice last. So there's a few interesting things to look at with the wise son. The first thing is that he uses the word you, and we're about to really go into the Russia, go in and criticize the wicked son for saying you and excluding himself from that process. But the Orchat Chaim explains that he says, because he says Hashem our God, he is including himself in that, but he's just using you as sort of a term of respect for whoever he's asking the question to, but he is not excluding himself, which I thought was interesting because it's not so dissimilar from the wicked son, but that change, recognizing Hashem as our God, makes all the difference. And what's even more interesting is he asks a very broad question about the laws and the statutes and everything, and we give him a very specific sort of law, and that doesn't seem to embody or encompass all of the answers to his questions at all. We seem to be quite an insufficient answer for the question he's asked, and so there are two answers I want to suggest for that. The first one is that this is the last Mishnah that comes up in Pesachim, and therefore what we're sort of saying to him is go and learn all the Mishnayot up to that point. That's what you have to do in order to answer your question. The second, I think, is a bit deeper, which is that his question is very intellectually based. And it makes sense because he's the wise son. He's not the good son, he's the wise son. It's a very intellectual based question. And what we're saying is, as we've spoken about, Seder night is not purely an intellectual exercise. It's an exercise of the heart. It's an emotional exercise. It's a transformation. It's an experience. And so the answer we give here, we sort of say, slow down, and we give him an answer that's all about the experience of Seder night, all about what you eat and when you eat it, and the actual physical things we do, because we're saying it's more than just an intellectual. There's more to it than that. We then move on to the wicked son. And he says, what is this worship to you and not to him? He excludes himself, denies the Jewish principle, and accordingly you will blunt his teeth, and you will say to him, for the sake of this, did the Lord do this for me in my going out of Egypt? For me and not for him. Had he been there, he would not have been saved. Very harsh words. The Beit HaLevi says that really he's not asking, the wicked son's not asking this as a question. He's sort of saying it's derogatory, it's rhetorical. What's all of this to you? He doesn't want answers. Based on this, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik says he has all the answers, but not questions. And we know Seder night is all about questions. He doesn't think he needs to ask. He thinks he has all of the answers already. And if we look at the language, blunt his teeth is a very strange expression, and the commentators have a multitude of different understandings of what this really means. The Rashi says you have to make him angry. Blunt his teeth is sort of set his teeth on edge. And in some way similar to the wise son, what we're saying to the wicked son is, you are part of this, and we want you to feel some sort of emotional connection. If that's anger, then that's anger. But don't coldly exclude yourself and distance yourself from the Seder, from your heritage. You are part of this. And that's why we blunt his teeth. Others say that blunting his teeth is literal, because what he's really saying, something we probably all unfortunately thought during the Seder, is, when will this end? I'm hungry, I want to eat. And we literally blunt his teeth and we say, no, you're not eating yet. There are more important things. And we go on to continue with the rest of our Maggid story. The simple son, he asks, what is this? We give him a simple answer. We don't give him an answer above what he has the ability to comprehend. We answer him on his own level. We then come to the one who doesn't know how to ask. And it says, you will open your conversation for him. And it says, you will speak to him, your son, on this day, going, for the sake of this, did the Lord do this for me in my going out of Egypt? And what's fascinating is we use the same pasuk, the same verse for the son who doesn't know how to ask, as we do for the wicked son. And the Ritva commentates on this, he comments on this, and says something that blew my mind. Said, sometimes we tend to think of the four sons that maybe they're all different ages. The one doesn't know how to ask, is too young to ask. Then the simple son doesn't really know what's going on. The rebellious teenager, and then when you're fully matured, the wise son. The River says that's not the case at all. All of these are the same level, the same age, the same level of understanding. The one who doesn't know how to ask, doesn't know how to because he doesn't ask deep questions, because he doesn't think deeply about the world around him and constantly ask and constantly look for answers. And Ritva says that that person is as bad as the wicked son. The basis for who we are, the basis for our role, and the base for which we can build our spirituality around is a constantly questioning and looking at the world and asking ourselves the big questions. Why are we here? What does God want from us? Why was the world created? We constantly need to ask those questions. And I think in society today, we don't necessarily, it's not encouraged to ask those questions so much. Everything's at breakneck speeds, and we consume content and we move from one thing to the next at such a speed that we don't have the ability to take time and ask questions. And the River's telling us that that person is as bad as the wicked person. We have to make time to ask the deep questions, to ask the powerful questions. And that is the basis. Only through doing that can we grow, can we gain a deeper appreciation for ourselves, our Judaism, our spirituality, and for the world around us. And we are running out of time, as you might be able to see. So that is really the note that I wanted to end on, just to say that we spoke about this idea of asking questions. And the whole Seder night, as we said, is a journey. It's a journey from slavery to freedom, but more than that, for us, it's a journey from the physicality, from the world that we're in 24/7, that's crazy and hectic, to an understanding of spirituality and appreciation of God and our role and our ability to mekadesh, to sanctify the world around us, to bring holiness and goodness into the world. And we have to go on that transformation. That's what Seder Night's about. Hopefully we've seen from the start of Seder Night, and as you go through the rest of the Seder, you'll be able to keep asking questions, keep looking, keep building upon this, and we should be able to keep asking those questions, to keep coming up with the answers, and through that to go on this transformative journey, to go on this experience, and to appreciate the meaning of the spiritual meaning of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the spiritual meaning of the Exodus. With that, I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach. Hope everyone has a really good and positive Seder, and a really enjoyable Pesach as a whole. It's supposed to be enjoyable for us all. Very quickly, could get cut off at any point, but just to mention, in 2 weeks' time, Rabbi Lister will be doing the final one of this series, where we'll be doing Pesach and me and a little bit of Kabbalah to understand Pesach on a deeper level. That'll be 2 weeks on Chol Hamoed Pesach on Tuesday night.